I mean, this goes back
considered as a mineral.
to Dr. Martin's point that perhaps one way to proceed is not to focus on the mineral itself, or exclusively, but the epistemology. But the way in which the circumstances that produce the entire orchestra of what's going on within these regions is really the way in which we can start to develop a more multi-tiered understanding of this,
You know, and
this
as you say
concept.
this, I'm starting to listen to this wonderful group again. I'm beginning to think that maybe the term shouldn't be conflict minerals, but conflict elements.
Yeah.
Air and water.
Absolutely.
Resources.
Exactly, conflict resources. I mean, because water is going to be the next biggest thing. I mean, it's starting to be that way. Around the world, in Turkey and Iraq and Jordan and other places.
New Mexico.
New Mexico, the
Oh,
Southwest.
potable water,
I mean,
absolutely.
yeah, potable water. I mean, and with so many multinational corporations buying up municipal water systems. I mean, I like the idea that water's in this bottle right here. But you know what, folks, scientifically, when sunlight hits these bottles, it transforms the plastic into producing more estrogens. And this is having an impact on both women and men in our society. Which they're endocrine disruptive chemicals and hormones. It's another. Arden Lang, psychiatrist back and wrote a book called The Politics of Experiences. He talked about this issue we're talking about, and I remember the scary thought that he brought up in his book that if we don't take action, at some point we all become prostitutes or murderers. And that's a scary, heavy burden. As we talk about these issues of respect for the land and the earth and all kinds of things, I'm frightened, folks, of my position. The fact that, what I have not said, I have not done in order to bring about some discussion, some resolution to these areas to protect human rights and dignity. I'm frightened for my soul.
To answer your question, or to give a answer to your question, not the answer, from the Big Table 2007, which was a concept note and issue paper on managing Africa's natural resources for growth and poverty reduction, they had a definition that they incorporated, and it said that in terms of defining natural resources in general, economists define natural resources as the gifts of nature. They're generally broadly classified into two main groups, renewable and non-renewable natural resources. Renewable natural resources include land, water, forestry, wildlife, fisheries, and biodiversity, while non-renewable natural resources include fossil fuels like oil and gas, metallic minerals like gold and platinum, and non-metallic minerals such as gypsum and clay.
Okay. So if you wanted to stick with non-renewables, if you wanted that to be
Oil
your
would
category.
go under non-renewable.
But I didn't know if you wanted to have a narrow format, and that has its purpose too, if you just wanted to stick with minerals. But I didn't know.
I mean, no, but that point you raised about the conflict resource, that's something very interesting, where it has a way bigger scope.
Well, if oil, the statistics vary, but if the 100 biggest economies in the world, 50 or 20 or 30, are multinationals. And of those, the 5 biggest, I don't know if the 5, but ExxonMobil is right up there.
Royal Dutch Shell.
Royal Dutch Shell.
Royal Dutch Shell.
So to leave them out of the conflict resource discussion, I don't know. But they're awfully big. Walmart's up there too, and that's a different problem.
Yeah, it's just that oil has developed its own field so strongly that, I mean, when we first decided to do the conflict minerals, we focused on this, because I mean, oil has just developed, like the natural oil curves, everything like that, OPEC members, non-OPEC members. I mean, that has just caused like a whole new field surge, is that oil.
So maybe you want to focus on minerals. I get that.
Well,
That's very valuable.
Oil carries a heavy ideological baggage
Yeah.
that needs to be unpacked. And so there are others. Coltan becomes more obvious because it's new, so we're kind of applying this new
And I mean,
episteme.
And the economic effect of oil is just so strong. I mean, if we compare it to like the minerals would be analyzed, oil
It's a
just has
different
such
category.
an impact directly short-term.
Sure.
This
Would be like
environmental degradation is taking place within my well in that area. It's having an impact on people's lives.
When we talk about institutions, if I could just add one thing, is one thing we haven't mentioned is our role, or the role of advertising, that we're all carrying around some of these conflict minerals with us probably right
Absolutely,
now.
Yeah.
Right here.
Yeah,
There's
I've
at least-
avoided diamonds, but,
There's at least 50 pounds of coltan in this room right now.
Yeah.
and if we don't bring out that, it's easy to say, oh, those bad multinationals, oh, those bad African governments, but
We buy it,
The consumer awareness, it goes back to
it's the consumers. The reason they're valuable is because of us. It's
Yeah.
because of us, wealthy Americans and Westerners that can afford all this stuff.
Yep.
And we are deeply implicated. And I don't know how to bring in us as an institution, but to leave us out is...
Well, I mean, that's something that a business school needs to pay attention to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Please.
Well, I wanted to touch on something that he said, but it's our overall demand for these conflict minerals that are creating an issue, and I know that you touched on the areas. However, there are loopholes to that idea because there are so many conflict minerals, such as diamonds, that are untraceable.
Yeah.
So once they get to the Swiss market and they're traded on the global diamond market, you can't tell which ones were smuggled, which ones were non-conflict, because there's no way to trace them. So it becomes an issue because, yeah, we can demand conflict-free minerals, but there's no system in place that ensures that we are getting conflict-free minerals, and our overall demand as a total is still contributing to
Yeah,
that.
and on that same note, like, I don't know if you're aware of Section 1502 of the SEC, that they wanna, it's pretty much, the act is saying that they want companies to actually disclose the whole supply chain of how they're making their products to guarantee that they're conflict mineral free. But then it's the corporate side. The government said, oh, you're just gonna be spending around 70 million. They've done their estimates and it's billions that would cost them to do this.
Right.
So it's like, you wanna be ethical, but then corporate, it's a business, so they don't see why they should be doing that if it's not longer gonna be a business for them.
Yeah.
So that's the big problem I see, how to make government really and corporate side.
Yeah, there was an article in the front page of the New York Times on Sunday in the business section, and it was about conflict minerals, and the businessman said, oh, those conflicts aren't due to us. It's not due to these minerals. I mean, the guy says that on the front pages of the New York Times. I don't know how much luck we're going to have.
Well,
And
the
that is
consumer.
consistently what happens at every level, whether it is the miners, whether it is the negotiants, whether it is the comptrollers who go in and deal with the negotiants and the purchasers, at every level of the supply chain, they're saying it's not our fault. It wasn't us.
And yes, Sarah.
Well, this you'll have to forgive me because I have a really bad cold, so I'm a little bit delusional. But what we were talking about, I was thinking a lot about what you said about narratives and how we need to bring this idea back to more on an individual level of like the trauma of the people and the suffering that they're experiencing. And I was thinking, I had a question for you guys about how, in terms of your project, you're going to leverage like the individual suffering versus like the economic suffering, because I think on some level those might be two different issues. And I was also, that book you mentioned, Politics of Experience, it reminded me a lot of Hannah Arendt's philosophy on the banality of evil, and how it's actually on an individual level where, like, inaction on an individual level is what leads up to these huge travesties on a governmental level. And I think that's something we need to address, because she says in the book that it wasn't Hitler by himself that killed millions of people. It was the guards underneath him that killed the people, and the people that are just following orders up the chain of command. Those people at the very bottom levels, the base levels of it, are the ones that we really need to look out for, because they think that they're just following orders and commands, and that's how they justify it to themselves. And it's the idea of an action that, and it reminds me of what you were saying as well, how in these countries where there's human rights abuses, they understand, they have the documents memorized, like, hey, these are my rights. But here in the United States, we don't care about it because we don't think we have to. And I think that's an
Until
individual
we lose
level.
it.
Yeah, and it brings it back to
Yeah.
the idea of your project needing like a fundamental grounding.
Yeah.
It needs to start, I don't think it should start from top down, it needs to start from the people.
I
all
think
the way up,
that's a
and something we
fantastic
often
point.
don't